Welcome to Best of the Best, Leonardo da Vinci. I'd like to introduce you to my 5 favorite pieces by the artist and explain to you what makes them and him so magnificent. Hopefully this inspires you to go and look it up, and then you can see for yourself. Compare it to other works you know. Tell me if you agree, if these are your 5 favorites too. But here we go. Here's my list. The top 5 Best of the Best by Leonardo da Vinci. So starting at the bottom, number 5 would be, drumroll, the Mona Lisa. Created in 1571. Now, how could the Mona Lisa be my 5th on the list when it's like the most famous painting of all time? I have a little secret to tell you. Shh, I didn't even want it on the list. I'm sorry, but it's just not my favorite painting. But, well, you know, it made the list because of its insane popularity and because of Leonardo's own regard for the painting. Did you know he never let it out of his possession for the rest of his life? Whoever paid him to paint it in the first place never got it. He kept it with him till he died when he willed it to the King of France, which is why it's in the Louvre instead of in some fancy museum in Italy, where some people think it should be. But I'm just not as blown away by it as I'm supposed to be. Perhaps it's because of how kind of common it's become since it's so famous. You see it in advertisements, you know, with a mustache on it, or some parody of it, in some way it's been changed. So maybe it's become too familiar? I'm not quite sure. When I went to see her in the Louvre, I'd already seen 2 of Leonardo's amazing paintings that had taken my breath away. Literally. You know, she's kind of small, much smaller than I'd expected, and behind this thick, bulletproof glass for her protection, which she needs since people have done things like throw acid at her. And, you know, you couldn't get too close. Beyond that, as I looked at her, I looked through this room where she is in, and there were hundreds of tourists in there, and it was kind of hot, and I gotta be honest, I didn't even go in. I just glanced over their heads because I'm tall. Just glanced over, saw her, and was like, all right, I'm good. And I walked off. So my bad, because I know that seeing an artwork in person is a lot different than seeing it in a textbook or on a commercial or anything like that. So maybe if I'd gone closer, she'd have risen in the ranks a little bit. But here she is at number 5. And in my defense, she is probably only as famous as she is, not because of her incredible, you know, masterful painting or the mystery of the smile or who is she really. She's probably as famous as she is because she was stolen in broad daylight in probably the most famous art heist of all time. Just showing that a little negative attention is still attention. Number 4, head of a woman. As my Italian sister-in-law says, la scapigliata, la scapigliata, scapigliata. Created around 1500. This is a much less conventional or expected choice than the Mona Lisa because she's much less well known. But look at her! She's amazing! I don't know how he created such a shining, soft touch to her face with the hair not even being finished. I mean, the face is so real, so 3D, it just sticks out and you can just see the feeling and emotion in it. And yet the hair just goes off, and something about that it's almost magical to me. And I have to admit that when I first saw this painting at age 17, I'd recently seen the movie Ever After, and so it just was so romantic because I was a silly teenage girl. But silly teenage girls aside, it's amazing. Number 3, The Last Supper, completed in 1498. I haven't had the privilege of seeing this one in person, though if I could, I would prefer to see it about 5 minutes after Leonardo finished it, because that's all about how long it took it to start deteriorating. Usually we say that bad paints makes bad paintings. Well, Leonardo both proved this wrong and true at the same time. You see, he was too good of a painter to create a bad painting. So despite the bad paints, he made a masterful painting. But because of the bad paints, said masterful painting tried to fade and crumble off the walls the second he was done, which kind of makes it a bad painting, so don't use bad paints. It's just not worth it. Now, granted, he was using bad paints because he was also a scientist and an inventor, and he was constantly experimenting with things. So he was trying new things. It's just unfortunate that this thing didn't really work. So this painting is actually what's called a fresco. Now, a fresco is different than a painting because of the materials you use. It's actually, you're painting on plaster. So you're mixing up your plaster and you're applying it to the wall, and then you paint on that plaster. And you have to paint on it before it gets so dry that it won't accept the paint. But when it's no longer too wet, otherwise the plaster would get all over your paintbrush. So it's a very delicate process, and you can only mix up so much plaster at a time. Otherwise, before you have a chance to paint the other side, the one side's dry and it's a disaster. So you have to be really careful about this, and it takes time. You have to schedule your bathroom breaks for before the plaster's gonna dry. Like I always tell my kids, you pee before you play or you paint. Because, if you took an unfortunately long bathroom break, when you got back, you'd have to crack it off the wall and start over, creating a total mess. So what is it that's so great about this painting or this fresco? It's his perspective. What is perspective? Perspective in art is what shows us that the picture is receding into the background. See, a picture, whether it's a painting or a fresco, is 2D, it's flat. But we try to show 3D subject matter. We try and show that the mountain is way behind us, or that this person is standing behind that person. And one way we do that is through perspective, linear perspective. And as you can see in the painting, all of the windows and the squares in the ceiling, all of them point to a center, and they point back into the distance. They get smaller as you go. Artists had been trying to figure this out for all time. Now, Leonardo not only figured it out, but then he took it a step further, and he used that perspective, used where all those lines converge. He made it the central focus of the picture so that our eye follows those lines down to Christ in the middle of the picture, middle of the table. This was masterful. It was revolutionary. No one had ever done it before, so points to Leonardo for this. And that's why it was ranked number 3. Number 2, St. John the Baptist, done in 1513. This probably wouldn't make most people's top 5 list of Leonardo da Vinci's paintings, but this is my list, so it does. Because I saw it in person. Let me tell you, there is such a difference between seeing a picture of a painting on a computer screen or in a book and seeing the painting in real life. So if you get the chance, see it. This one happens to be in the Louvre, and the reason it made my list is because it's one of the 2 paintings that really stole Mona Lisa's thunder for me. See, as I was walking to go see the little lady, I was passing just painting after painting after painting. The Louvre is enormous. I don't remember the exact number of paintings in there. You'll have to look it up for me. And as I was walking by, not even looking at some too carefully because I was headed to see Mona, I stopped at this painting of St. John the Baptist. It caught my eye. It just really stood out from the others. And so I walked closer and found out this was by Leonardo da Vinci. No wonder it was so good. And what was so good about it, again, the picture doesn't really do it credit. Seeing it in person is a must for this one. I later learned that it uses what's called chiaroscuro, and that is what makes it so dramatic. It's that way a light figure emerges from the darkness in a soft way. There's not a harsh outline of the figure. There's very much this softness as he emerges from the darkness behind in such a dramatic way, really probably not possible even with a powerful spotlight. But it grabs your eye because the glowing nature of his flesh is in such stark contrast to the dark that I couldn't look away. So it made my list and came in as number 2. And you gotta admit, it is pretty amazing what he did. And now we're to the best of the best of the best. Number 1, The Virgin and Child with St. Anne and St. John the Baptist. A very long name for a painting that's not even actually a painting. It's actually a sketch that would have been converted into a painting, otherwise known as the Burlington House cartoon. Not what we watch on Saturday mornings. A cartoon in this sense is a preparatory sketch, a sketch an artist would do before he went and did the final draft of his painting. See, they didn't draw and erase and mess up on the final place they were going to paint it. They first did these sketches, but how to transfer it onto their final paper? Well, they would actually use a pin and prick around the lines all the way through, and then they'd lie that sketch, that cartoon, over where they were going to do their painting and blow charcoal into those holes. And so when they lifted it up, you had kind of a dot painting, so they just connect the dots. Now, this particular cartoon doesn't have any pinpricks in it, which means most likely Leonardo realized it was so amazing on its own that he didn't want to ruin it by poking holes in it. So we have the sketch. Again, in person, this thing is amazing. I saw it at the National Gallery in England, in London, and I'm so glad he didn't put pinholes all over in it, because this was my first experience with art that took my breath away. I couldn't look away. It was amazing. Like the head of a woman, it's unfinished in areas. The hand isn't completed. And yet those faces, they're so soft, they're so real, but more perfect than real in this glowing heavenly way. It makes me emotional just talking about it. It's so incredibly alive that it almost feels sacred to me. How he could do that with just a drawing, I can't even begin to explain that. And so there you go. That is the best of Leonardo da Vinci. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what your favorites are and why you disagree with any of the ones I have chosen. Be sure to subscribe so you can see the best by yet another amazing artist. And if you're interested in creating your own masterpieces like Leonardo da Vinci, hop on over to my video inspired by the masters, Leonardo da Vinci, and see what you can do. Thanks for joining me. See you next time.